Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Last Friday saw what has been described as one of the worst riots in a British prison for more than 25 years. Yesterday, the Justice Secretary, Liz Truss, was summoned to the Commons to explain what happened in the Category B prison in Birmingham and how violence then spilled over to Hull after some inmates were moved to the jail there that evening. She told MPs that staff shortages and the drug and violence problems gripping prisons in England and Wales would last for months. Here's a flavour from yesterday's statement to Parliament.
Levels of violence are too high in our prisons. We also have very concerning levels of self-harm and deaths in custody. That's why we are reforming our prisons to be safe and purposeful places and taking swift action to deal with drugs, drones and phones.
The Secretary of State has a prison crisis on her hands, and it would be helpful if she finally admitted this to the House and to the country. The riot at the privately run Birmingham prison on Friday has been described as probably the most serious riot in a B category prison since Strangeways.
Nothing that happened in Winson Green in my constituency on Friday came as a shock. The Independent Monitoring Board report on HMP Birmingham found that staff resource constraints gave cause for concern and there was a lack of capacity to run the full prison regime.
We've already heard about a dramatic rise in psychoactive drug use, mobile phone use and indeed the use of drones. I'm told by my local prison officers this is because the levels of prison officers has got dangerously low.
Rob Nicholson, the Prison Officers Association rep in Hull, described the situation at the weekend as a powder keg waiting to go off. The prison was put on lockdown. It was said to be on the brink of riot. Prison officers tell me they're afraid to go to work.
Two-thirds of our prisons are overcrowded. We've seen disturbances at many prisons, not just Birmingham, which we're discussing today. And the level of suicide in our prisons is the highest that it has ever been in over 25 years. This is a truly shameful record. And we've seen very little remorse from the Secretary of State today. Will she now apologise?
Well, I have been very clear about the issues we have in our prison system, and since I secured this role in July, I've been focused on dealing with them, making sure that we make our prisons safer, making sure that we invest in those staff, making sure we invest in mental health facilities in our prisons to deal with this situation.
Now, we asked the Ministry of Justice if a minister was available, but none was. However, luckily enough, we are joined by the Shadow Secretary of State for Justice, Richard Bergen.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Yes, welcome. All right, thank you. Now, you told Parliament yesterday there was now a crisis in our prison system. What do you think's caused the crisis?
Well, I think this isn't a crisis which has occurred or brewed in the last few weeks or months. It's been a long time coming.
How many years, do you think?
Well, if you look in 2010, or since 2010, the government has decided to cut frontline prison staff by 6,000. That obviously plays a big part in what is a crisis. There's a record number of assaults on our prison staff, and violence is out of control in our prisons. And, as you said earlier in your package, it's the most serious Category B prison riots for more than a quarter of a century, if we think back to the Strangeways riots back in 1990.
Right, so you're blaming the Conservatives for cutting officers and, before that, the coalition government since 2010. And you think that is the sole cause of the problems that we are seeing today?
I didn't say it was a sole cause,
right,
but it's got to be significant that 6,000 fewer frontline prison staff are present. So we've got a crisis in terms of understaffed prisons, overcrowded prisons. And so there's a number of factors involved.
But this has obviously been decades in the making, hasn't it? I mean, some of the blame must go back to the Labour governments pre-2010. If you're talking about issues of overcrowding, of sentencing, of mental health, of drugs problems, and, yes, cutting officers, this has been a long time coming.
Well, I think we've got to have an open mind about how to solve this prisons crisis going forward. And that means questioning lots of the ways our prisons run, both in relation to the way people with mental health problems are treated, in relation to the way prisoners on short sentences are treated, in relation to staffing levels, in relation to rehabilitation, because in order to protect society, we need rehabilitation to work, because rehabilitation also, by the way, costs less than reoffending.
Right, but prisoners deserve some of the blame for rioting. I mean, they are in jail to be punished. It isn't meant to be a pleasant experience in that sense. So, I mean, are they entitled to much better conditions?
Can I add something? I mean, there's a really salient point, which I'm surprised you haven't mentioned, which is that this is a private jail. This was outsourced to G4S, and the point about the...
We're coming on to that.
Hey,
That's something I made clear in Parliament yesterday.
Hang on. Good heavens.
Just ignore
difference.
the reactions from Kelvin. Carry on.
The difference is when a private contractor comes in and offers to undercut the public sector, it is because they're paying their staff less, and they pay their staff less because they're less well trained. And there's huge body of evidence that shows the public sector may not be good at everything, but they're very, very good at staff management. They're very, very good at managing the prisoners they've got. And undertrained prison officers are not so good at it. What happens then is that the prisoners feel themselves to be under threat from one another. And I heard anecdotally somebody say about Birmingham that the staff were frightened of the prisoners, which is a woeful situation. That was 2 years ago.
Although hardly a surprise,
well,
though,
no,
is it?
It is a surprise.
Well,
because
is
the
it
fact
in those situations?
No, the prison estate prides itself on incredible management, and no member of staff should ever be frightened of the prisoners.
Well, it's down to privatisation, and the companies running the prisons.
You know what? I wondered how long it was going to be before we started blaming
Well, we haven't disappointed then in terms of Zoe.
But the truth about the matter is that these are vile pigs who are being allowed to get drugs and the like flown in or brought in by their families.
But how are they managing to do that? Isn't that because the prison isn't being properly run?
I'm in favour. I am absolutely in favour of hiring more staff, and if it can be proved
so the cuts have been a mistake.
If the cuts turn out to be the reason, but actually let's worry about whose fault this is. These are the vile pigs who are in there in the first place.
Right, OK. So in the end, it doesn't matter who's running it. Do you agree with that? That actually wouldn't make any difference if we were ending the privatisation of jails?
I raised the point yesterday in Parliament. Not everyone was pleased, but I think the government needs to consider the issue of whether or not it's correct for profit-making companies to be making money out of society's ills and out of the incarceration of human beings.
Right.
The prison in Birmingham, by the way, had the most assaults on staff out of any prison in the whole of the UK.
Right, so are you saying it's because of cutting...
Staff.
Yeah, but hang on. So that's an ideological point you're making about privatisation or nationalising or putting it back into the public sector. I mean, is that really the critical point here? I mean, you can take a sideswipe, of course, at the general policy of the Conservative government. Is that the root cause of what's going on in Birmingham jail?
It's something that needs to be considered, but the point I'd make also is that different rules apply to private prisons. I was pleased yesterday when Liz Truss, in response to a question I asked when I said, is she happy with the fact that private prisons don't have to disclose staffing levels in the way that public sector prisons do? She says she's going to do something about it. I hope she does.
Right. What would you do differently? Let's say you're against private prisons, you're against G4S. What would you do differently to reduce overcrowding in jails?
Well, I think we need to have an open mind. An
open mind is fine, but it's not a specific policy. Do you want to see more lenient sentences?
This is a situation which will not be solved easily.
Right.
I think we need to look...
So you haven't got any solutions, Richard, have you?
Well, what we wouldn't have done, we wouldn't have cut 6,000 frontline prison staff. We wouldn't have started sticking the boots in to the Prison Officers Association and the staff. Perhaps the government can learn from the people who are going to work every day and in fear of being punched, spat at and attacked or even worse.
Absolutely. But let's come to some of the other potential policies. Would you like to see less overcrowding, fewer people going to jail?
Well, we certainly want to see less overcrowding.
Right, and fewer people going to jail.
A point I'd make as well is I am concerned that people on shorter sentences are going into prison without drug addictions and coming out of prison with drug addictions. They're coming out of prison more likely to commit serious crimes than when they went in. That's not good for the individual prisoners. That's not good for society. We do need to look at the way shorter sentences work and at rehabilitation.
It's absolutely true about the drugs, but politicians are obsessed with short sentences. The problem in the prison estate is long sentences, and this has been going on since the Labour government. Sentences have crept up and up and up. Judges are kind of under pressure to make sentences harsher, make them harsher, and what you get is this huge number of prisoners. You know, we've got the highest number of prisoners now that we've had in my entire career.
Good news.
Well, I think it's good news,
and I think we should staff up prisons so that these people who are beating up our prison officers, which is an absolute disgrace,
Oh, yeah, I mean,
right,
yeah,
should be protected. And if they're not going to be protected, we should build jails where these pigs are locked up 24 hours a day.
And how do you stop...
And one of the problems is liberal politicians believing that
All right,
by giving
but Kelvin
everybody
Mackenzie...
apple pie and giving them short sentences,
Kelvin,
this is the way to
Finally,
have
but repeat offences are the big problem, aren't they? And you won't stop repeat offences if you lock people up in those sorts of conditions.
There is a percentage of society who wants
Yeah,
to
but
be
listen,
vile
can-
all day and all night.
Rehabilitation has to work in order to protect
Rehabilitation
society.
does not work for most of these pigs.
Right, and I'm calling time on this. Thank you, Richard Bergen.